So in today's video, what we're going to do is we're going to try to write a few functions, okay? Because everything in Java executes within a function, and when your Java program starts, we can now actually talk about what this is. When your Java program starts, Java will look in a class for a function called main, right? And the signature of a function, which we'll talk about later when I explain what functions are, this is the signature of the main function that you have to write. So every code path that Java takes actually will start with a main function, okay? So why do you need functions? Well, technically you could actually write your whole program in one function, right? Or at least you could write a lot of simple programs in one function. So let's give it an example. So earlier we had done an area of a circle thing. So today we'll actually start with that. So let's say I had a, so let's say I create a variable called pi, okay, and I say 3.14, right? And now, and I say the radius is, let's say 10, right? And now when I say area, basically all I need to know is the formula. So I say area equals pi into r, right? And I can sort of print this out. So I can say s out, and I can say area equals area, right? Sorry, I need to say plus, right? And now if I print this out, sorry, there is an symbol error here, radius, let's run that again. So if you see, the area is now 3.14 square units, okay? This code is fairly short and could possibly be left here. But what could happen is that the reason you want to write a function is sometimes there is a piece of code that you will reuse many times, right? So instead of actually rewriting all these lines of code again, over and over, what you can do is you can extract this code into what is known as a method or a function in Java. So how would you do that? All you have to do is just follow the kind of thing that you have that is already done for you with main. A function has two components. One is called the header and the second is called the body, okay? So the function header in Java, for example, contains a few things. It contains these things called modifiers, which in this case is public. We won't talk about that today. The second modifier is something called static, right? Static means that this function can be called without creating what is known as an object. Again, we don't know what that means right now, but when we do classes and objects later, we'll come back to that, right? This is the stuff which is interesting for us today, right? This stuff that I've highlighted. We'll have to use the keyword static right now to create our functions. But again, I'll come back to this in a future class, right? In a future video. So the header of a function takes what is known as a return value. That means what is this function going to return to the person or the other function or the function that calls it. It has a name, just like a variable. Then it has parentheses, and this parenthesis basically contains a comma separated list of arguments, right? So actually let's write a function and you'll actually see how it works. So for now, you have to create functions within the same class as static, and I'll tell you why once we get to object-oriented programming later, right? So let's say we want to write the same area function, right? But we don't want to include it here. We want to actually remove this here, and we want to write this area function. We know that this function is going to return a double, right? When we saw this here. So I'm going to say double is the return value. I'm going to call it area of circle. And now I'm going to say I'm going to pass in a parameter or an argument to the function. So I'm going to say double again and radius, right? So now what's going to happen is, if you notice, you'll see that this stuff is all underlined up here in red, which means this code actually won't compile, because the reason for that is in this signature, what I've declared is to Java, what I've declared is area of circle. So this is how you would read it in English. Area of circle is a function which takes one argument of type double. The argument's name is radius, and it returns a type of double, right? So let's actually do this. So I'm going to say, let's paste some of that code from above. So I'm going to say double, right? Radius we don't need because it's actually going to be passed to us from the person who wants to create this. So in this case, it will be main. You'll see this later. And all it does is it actually calculates the value and returns it. So just like English, you would say you return something to someone when someone calls for it, right? So you say the return keyword and you actually give it an expression, right? So this will, what this will do is this will say double, so sorry, Control Z, area equals area of circle, right? And now I can say 10. Okay, now notice something. This is why you actually had to pay a lot of attention to the classes earlier with the data types and the fundamental data types. This value that I'm passing this function area of circle is an int. There's no decimal point, but an int can fit in a double. Therefore, Java actually has no problems with this, and Java actually says it's fine, right? So in this case, I'm passing it an int, but I could have changed this to 10.5, for example, right? And this would mean that actually it's now compatible. So double is now compatible with itself, and it's compatible with any other data type generally. Okay, so let's run this code and see what happens, right? And you get the same result. So all that's happened here is I created this function called area here. Okay, so when you are also practicing and you are creating more functions for this tutorial in the same class, make sure that you start with static. You don't understand why right now, but you'll figure it. I'll tell you that later. Make sure you have this particular signature in your header, which is a return type, area of circle, which is the name, double, which is the data type of the value you're going to give it. So actually you can almost read this as double radius equals 10, right? Which we have done in a previous video. So this kind of gives you an idea of why you sort of need to have these kinds of functions, right? So now if I want to calculate the area later, I could say, could say double area 2 is equal to area of circle, and this time I could say 45.8, right? And I could print this out. So I could say area 2 is equal to, there you go, and let's run this. So, and this is your answer, right? So no matter how many times I need to use the area code, right, I could just call it using this type of syntax, and the function will kind of do the work for me rather than having to type out these lines over and over and over, right? So this is how you would create functions. Now, one other thing I wanted to kind of show you to debug, to help you kind of step through what's happening, because now what's happened is earlier we always wrote stuff within this code block. So visually you didn't have to sort of focus on other parts of the code. Now you actually have a new thing which kind of looks like this, right? So I want to actually show you how you can debug a function and see for yourself what values Java interprets for the values you give it in memory, right? So how do you do debugging, right? In the IDE, it's very simple. You just click here, and what this means is when this main function starts and when you start it in debug mode, once you get to this, once the program comes to this code line, right, this doesn't have to be here, it could actually have been lower as well. Java will actually give you certain other features, right? Or sorry, the IDE will give you certain other features. So let's actually run this, but we'll say debug, right? And now see what happens. Now, if you notice, it's given you, it says args is a variable of a string type. Now, what you need to do here is, if you just mouse over these buttons here, you'll see that something that says step over, that means the highlight would go from here to the next one, right? Or you can say step into. In this case, we actually want to step into. Why? Because we want to go into this area of circle function and see how it works. Okay, so I'm going to say step into, and now notice something. It's actually giving us a clear picture of what's actually happening in memory in your Java virtual machine, right? It's telling us that this radius variable is 10.0. Why is it 10.0? Because I had passed 10 over here, right? So let's go to the next step. Sorry, now this time I don't need to step into because I've already come into the function. But notice the highlight also changes. So actually this makes it really simple when you want to debug your programs, right? Now what I can do is I can say step over. Step over basically means go to the next line, right? So I can say step over. Now notice the IDE has printed out so much of information for us, right? So you can actually visually see what's happening. Now I'm going to do this again. So I'm going to say step over. It'll come to the last line. So what actually happened was, it happened pretty quickly. It came to this last line, okay? And because this last line was a return, it actually came back to the top here. So which means that we've gone through this whole function and now we are actually back to the main, right? So since we've gone through this, let's actually now say step over here. So in this step, it shows you that the area has been calculated, right? So this is a very cool way of sort of going through your programs in slow motion at your own pace, right? So I can actually keep saying step over to come to the next line. Notice it's kind of skip this line. Then it's going to do the same thing. Here too, I could say step into and go into this function, and it would actually go back and do the same thing it did earlier, right? Now I'm going to say step over, and now I've reached the end. And so if I say step over again, this debugging thing will end, right? So everything is over. I've actually finished running the program because I've reached the end block of this main function, right? And at that point, your Java program ends, and basically it returns to the operating system. So this is a very simple way of creating functions, creating your own functions. I've shown you just one because I actually wanted to focus first on the syntax, which you've seen here, and then I wanted to actually do a debugging session, which is what you've seen here. Okay, so this is all there is to do with functions. So actually you could actually write functions. You could write n number of functions, right? So you could write, for example, static int sum int num1 comma num2. Sorry, you have to put a data type for every parameter, right? So let me just close the debugging session. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to say return num1 plus num2, and now I could have actually called the function here. So I could say sout sum 10 comma 20 is equal to, and then I could call the function directly 10 comma 20, right? So let me remove this debugging. To remove debugging or to stop debugging, just click on it again. Once it has disappeared, it's basically gone. Now you say shift F10 and you can see the value of your function run here. You could have debugged the function perfectly easily, no matter what. And yeah, so that's it. So this is functions. They have headers, they return values. If they don't return a value, you would say static void doesn't return a value, right? Now this function actually takes no arguments, and I could just print something out here. So I could say in doesn't return a value, right? And then I could call this function here by saying s out. Sorry, I could just call it because it's going to print stuff out. So I'm going to say doesn't return a value, run this, and it's printed out this statement from here. Okay, so this is functions in a very basic sort of format. Hope it makes some sense, and yeah, see you in the next video. Thank you.